and welcome the Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies program and the UNE Interprofessional Education Collaborative. Welcome you here, and we're thrilled to welcome Derek Volk. He is the author of Chasing the Rabbit, A Dad's Life, Raising a Son on the Spectrum. He's here to speak with us today about his experience with his boy, with his young man now, who lives with autism spectrum disorder. And it's really an amazing opportunity for us to learn from the first person about what this experience is like so that we can all be better healthcare professionals, better teachers, better family members, and better friends to people who have autism and the people that love them. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you all again for inviting me to come out here. I really appreciate it. It's a great crowd for a nice evening here in Biddeford. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my story of raising my son Dylan, who's now 25, so about most of your ages. And I'm going to tell you little bits and pieces about what we went through. Throughout the presentation, I have some videos of Dylan because he couldn't join us tonight. He lives in Orlando, Florida now, and so I can't get him back for every gig. And so I'll be showing some videos of Dylan, so he'll be all over the place. He would be very happy if he knew he was on 7 screens. He would love that. So I'll show some videos of Dylan, and then throughout the presentation, I was asked to present some questions for you as a group, as a table for you sitting around, or the people in Portland, to kind of discuss as a group. So we'll take like 5 minutes. You guys can discuss whatever the questions that I put up are, and then we can maybe do a little quick Q&A about it, and then get back to the presentation. Does that sound good? All right. And then at the end, I'll leave some time for Q&A at the end as well. All right, so start out. This is, if you have a cell phone, and if you want to jot down 22828, if you text the word chasing to that number, then you go on our email list. And we don't bury you with emails, don't worry about it. I don't like a million emails either. But every now and then we'll send out an email with some new video that we've done, or something new that's gone on, or some new event that we're going to that you might be interested in. So if you want to follow us, you can do that. You can also follow us all over the internet. That's our Facebook page, is Chasing the Rabbit Book, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on the right there is, or left, I guess, depending on where you're standing, is Dylan's radio show, which is called Riding with Dylon. So check that out. And check out Dylon Comedy. You'll want to see that later in your dorm room, not now. And so this is our book. It's called Chasing the Rabbit, A Dad's Life, Raising a Son on the Spectrum. And the first thing I always like to do is I explain the title, because when people see the title, their first assumption is, because I'm the primary author, that I'm chasing the rabbit. And in actuality, the title is about Dylan chasing the rabbit. And the reason that I came up with that title is because I've always described Dylan as like a greyhound. So if you ever seen one of the greyhound dog races, or seen them on TV or whatever, the dog chases this mechanical rabbit, right? But he never catches the rabbit. Like, you've never seen a greyhound actually catch the rabbit. And that's Dylan. That's Dylan's life. Dylan is like the greyhound, and the rabbit is normal. And he sees it, he knows exactly what it looks like, but no matter how much he runs, and no matter how much he exhausts himself, and trust me, if you read our book, he exhausts himself trying to catch this rabbit. He cannot catch it. And one quick thing about the book is I do have, we can talk after, I have books for sale, and I'm going to sell them for half price, so they're $10 for any student instead of $20. And I have audiobooks and socks, and I'm going to sell everything for discounted prices for you guys. So if anybody's interested after. So a lot of times when I tell that story, especially when Dylan's with me and he's like 5 feet away, I see people, especially parents, they like cringe because I just called my kid not normal and he's like right there. And so they get a little anxious, and I see him tense up. And there's really nothing to tense up about, because Dylan knows that he's not normal. And in fact, he takes offense at the term normal when describing it to the vast, population. And I'll show you the video in a minute. And the reason is because when people talk about him as if he's just like everybody else, they're devaluing the struggles that he goes through every day. So if you say that, oh, well, there's no such thing as normal, everybody's quirky, whatever, then you're devaluing the challenges that he lives through on a day-to-day basis, and the struggles that he goes through just to get through a day. And so with that, I will play Dylan's video. Now, so the sound wasn't working great, so I was going to have to come down here and play it on the thing. So I'm going to disappear for a little bit with the mic. So here we go.
Hey, it's Dialon. So sorry I couldn't be there with you guys today, but let me give a little insight into my experience for you real quick. This is how I feel about this very popular notion out there about there is no such thing as normal. I hear people say that outside the autism community. I hear it all the time. People like to say that, we're all weird in our own way, and there's really no such thing as normal. And growing up with a disability on top of what would already probably be a pretty weird personality, I feel like I can definitely tell you there is a such thing as normal. And now, if you don't believe me, check it out. When you're 8 and you are obsessed with scoring the winning soccer goal for your soccer team, that's normal. But when you're 8 and you're obsessed with learning the different wingspans of different species of birds, that's not normal. And so it's just like this very idea, that there's normal, I feel like is not true, because I don't think there's anything wrong sometimes in many situations with wanting to be normal. Like I was at this conference with my dad in Boston in high school, and there was this other individual there. I presume he had Asperger's. He raised his hand, and he said this kind of thing. He started talking about how, we're all weird in our own way, and I don't think there's any such thing as normal because we're all unique. And it was very obvious to me that this kid was just repeating some rhetoric that had been told to him, but I still had to raise my hand. And my dad swears that I used this exact phrasing. I don't remember this, but for dramatic effect, I said, excuse me, that's bullshit. There is a such thing as normal. The difference between us and regular people is that, yes, everybody's weird, but they all have quirks that fall within the range of what society considers normal, and we don't. We fall outside that range. And he didn't have anything to say to that. Like, I felt bad for the kid. I just left him speechless with that. But I just felt like I had to say it, And then we were walking out, and my dad asked me where I came up with that, because he thought it was a very profound, thought to be expressed by my 16-year-old self. And I said, I don't know. I just came up with it, which is true. I probably think about 100 of those profound thoughts every day. And I just said that on the spot, and it really expresses how I feel. So if you know somebody with Asperger's or trying to fit in socially, I would just advise that there's nothing wrong with letting them know, yeah, there is a normal, and sometimes it's okay to try to be normal.
All right, I'm back. So this is Dylan when he was born, shortly after he was born. So Dylan, when Dylan was born, everything seemed pretty fine. I actually did a study about Dylan's, ironically, Dylan was born in our senior year of college on purpose. I always have to specify that. And I did a study for the first 6 months of his life as like an independent study, studying the communication of this baby, which is kind of ironic as he turned out to have autism. But everything was fine. He hit all his milestones at a pretty normal rate. There was really nothing that unusual about Dylan. as a baby, with the one exception, and that is whenever we were in the car, he would scream. And I mean like scream. And so we were going to school in Orono at the University of Maine, and we're from Portland. And so when we would come back to visit, Dylan's grandparents, he would scream all the way home. And Amy, my wife, would get in the back seat and she would try to entertain him. And we had a dog and we'd try to, hey, look at the dog. And nothing worked. He would just scream and scream and scream. And then somewhere around like Yarmouth, he would conk out. And right as we're about to pull into the yard. And so we didn't really know. We just thought the kid didn't like cars. And we didn't really think a whole lot of it. And other than that, everything seemed to be about, normal for a baby. When Dylan was about 2 years old, I was working in the family business, which is right here in Biddeford. I own a corrugated box company here in Biddeford. I was working in the family business, and Amy was a stay-home mom. Some of our neighbors needed some help watching some of their kids because they had some part-time jobs. They both happened to be boys, ironically. So one day, I come home from work, and Amy sits me down, and she says, something's not quite right with Dylan. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I don't know, but something's not right. I then went into what I've learned as I've done presentations all around the country, a pretty typical dad response, which was denial. He's fine. Nothing wrong with him. You're just overreacting. And one thing you'll learn as you get older, and there's a lot of ladies here in the room, is that moms are smarter than dads. And so she knew. She's like, no, I'm telling you, something's not right. And I said, why do you say that? What would make you say that? And she said, well, when the other boys are at the house and they're communicating or playing blocks or trucks or toys or ball or whatever, they're interacting with each other. There's some kind of communication going on between them, and there isn't with Dylan. It's almost like he doesn't even care or notice that they're even in the room. And I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't seem right to me. And so I heard this whole thing, and then I went to my next default, which was, well, that's just because he's way smarter than those kids. And clearly, my son is intellectually superior to those other young men, and that's why he doesn't want to communicate with them. And again, Amy was like, no, that's not it. But in my head, that seemed like a perfectly logical explanation, because Dylan was a very smart little boy and is a very smart young man, but he was a very smart young boy in very unusual ways. And I'll give you a couple examples. When Dylan was 2, he was obsessed with vacuum cleaners. Like obsessed with vacuum cleaners. He knew everything about vacuum cleaners. He studied them. The Sunday paper would come and he would read about all the different vacuum cleaners that were for sale at all the different stores and cut out the little pictures of the vacuum cleaners and make little albums out of them. It was a little weird, but cute. And, we didn't think a whole lot of it. We used to go over, do you remember Service Merchandise? Anybody remember that store over near the mall? There used to be a department store called Service Merchandise, and they were the only store that actually had vacuum cleaners that you could plug in. So we would go over there. This was our Saturday. This was Saturday life for us. We would go out for breakfast, and then we would take Dylan over to Service Merchandise, where I would sit with my latest Sports Illustrated, and Amy would have a book, and Dylan would spend literally hours plugging in the different vacuum cleaners and then quizzing us on which ones we liked better and why. And we could never just blow him off with yeah, I like the blue one. We had to have a reason. He would want to know what our logic was behind our decision-making process of why we chose one vacuum cleaner over another. And that was a little odd, but again, we thought it was cute. When he was a little older, he was a furnace for Halloween. Again, kind of different. We used to go to open houses on weekends, and we're a young couple, so it was legit that we might be looking at a house, and we'd go in and we'd go visit walk around the downstairs for a few minutes, and then we'd say, "Do you have a basement?" and then we would proceed down into the basement where we would have to stay there until the furnace actually kicked in, because if we left before then, Dylan would have a meltdown. So we would have to stay until the furnace kicked in, and then could leave, and then we'd say thank you, and then we'd usually write a fake name so that they wouldn't actually call us. And so he was a furnace for Halloween. He was a very cute little furnace, but he was very annoyed when every door he went to, people were like, "And what are you?" And he's like, "Duh, obviously I'm a furnace." And not to brag or anything, but he was the best furnace costume in the neighborhood. Just saying. And so as he got a little older, those kind of quirky, unusual interests continued. When he got to be the point where he was potty training, most kids when they're potty training, I don't know if you've been around a little brother or sister or something that's potty training, they go on the toilet and they get like a sticker or they get a piece of candy, right? Dylan was allowed to lift up the back of the toilet and watch all the goings on behind the toilet. That was his reward for going on the potty. And that's his sister that's standing next to him. She's now in law school, and she's looking at him thinking, well, this is perfectly logical. I don't know why we wouldn't be looking under the toilet. And if you get a chance, if you want to see a really good video, there is a video on our YouTube channel. If you just go to Derek and Dylan Volk on YouTube, or go to chasingtherabbit.org and go to our speaking tab, you can see a video. Dylan and Mariah, that's his sister Mariah, did a video a presentation called Autism and the Sibling Relationship last year at the Southern Maine Autism Conference, and it's great. They really did a great job and talked about how that dynamic changed over the years, especially for Mariah, and how she is the person she is today because of Dylan, and how much Dylan impacted her, and how much, really what she was talking about is how much he impacted all of us. We're all better people because of Dylan, and they just did a great job with that. So as Dylan got older, he started to, show some signs that there were issues, but, most of them were within our own home. And so we could kind of control them. They were manageable. And then when Dylan was 5, he went off to summer camp. This is Dylan heading off to summer camp on day 1. And you can see he's happy. He's, going to go swim and, I don't know, do whatever kids do at summer camp, make crafts or whatever. And so he was perfectly happy to go. So he goes off to this summer camp. It was a couple of days a week, 40 minutes from, we were living in Portland at the time, and it was about 40 minutes away up in the Sebago Lake area. And we thought everything was going fine. We didn't think anything of it. He came home happy. One day I was sitting at work and the phone rang, and it was the director of the camp, the head of the whole camp. And she said, "Come get your son. He's a monster." And I was obviously taken aback by that. And so, this was before cell phones. So Amy was probably out, at the beach or somewhere with Mariah outside. And so I had to track her down and go to Portland and pick her up and drive up to Wyndham. And we walk in and, we walked in and we thought, okay, well, we're going to address whatever the issue is, and we'll find out, what we can do to make the day better for Dylan. And what we were told is, don't send him back. He's not welcome to come back here again. And that was the end of summer camp for Dylan. That was the first of many places over the years that Dylan would be asked not to return. But as time went by, we got really good at learning when we were going to get the "please don't have Dylan come back here anymore" line. And we would pull him from whatever it was just before the humiliation of being told that he's going to get kicked out of wherever he is. But it was at this point that we realized, this is a bigger issue than something's just not quite right with Dylan. That, he was having, major meltdowns. And when I say meltdown, it's like, have you ever seen a kid have a temper tantrum? Picture a temper tantrum on steroids. He was completely unconsolable. He was like that kid in the car seat. Once he got out of control, there was nothing we could do to calm him down. And it was getting harder and harder because he was getting older, and the temper tantrums were becoming louder and bigger and more disruptive. And so we knew that there was something had to be done. So we started saying, okay, let's try to figure out what's going on. You know, there's got to be something that we can do about this. And at that point, we went on what we jokingly called the Diagnosis of the Month Club. It was more like the Diagnosis of the Year Club because it took usually like 6 months to get into one of these experts. And then they would meet with him for 3 or 4 months. And then one of the things that we learned and discovered over time is that whatever it is that they specialized in, that's what he had. So when we went to the lady that specialized in OCD, OCD was the reason for all his problems. When we went to the lady that specialized in Tourette syndrome, Tourette syndrome was the reason for all his problems. And so every time we would get one of these diagnoses, we would, you know, you couldn't Wikipedia anything. So we would go to the bookstore and we would buy a book about whatever the diagnosis was. And then we would read the book. And when I say we, I mean Amy. And then I would come home from work a few days later and I'd say, you know, what do you think about this diagnosis? And she would say, well, it kind of sounds like Dylan, but like it doesn't connect all the dots. It doesn't complete the picture. And so we would go on to the next specialist who would, lo and behold, diagnose him with whatever it is that they specialized in. And nothing ever fit. Nothing ever made sense. When he was in first grade, he was obsessed with birds, like obsessed with like vacuum cleaners, except now it was birds. And this is Dylan actually, he did a 90-minute presentation about birds for his first grade class. He took questions from the audience. He, you know, gave him lessons. He gave him a quiz. I mean, it was, and then he got mad when the teacher told him it was time to stop. And then he spent 40 minutes at dinner telling us all the things he didn't get to because the teacher was so rude as to stop him after only 90 minutes. And so he went to this one counselor for a year. The whole year of first grade, he went to the same counselor. And all he did that whole year was draw pictures of birds and talk about birds. And at no point did she suggest that he had autism or Asperger's. Never came up. And this was 1998, 97, 98. And so very few people, in her defense, she said he had spirited child syndrome. That was her diagnosis. And so we never got any sign. When that was classic Asperger's, you know, it's a classic what they call a special interest. Okay, he obsesses over one thing to the point where that's basically all he can think about. It's all he can talk about. It was really hard to divert him to something else. I remember it was about this time that my brother turned like 28 years old or something, and I said, Dylan, I said, we should call Uncle Judd today because he turns 28. And Dylan goes, you know, there are 28 different kinds of hawks. And I'm like, oh my God, seriously? I mean, he could turn every conversation back to birds somehow. And so we were struggling trying to figure out what was going on with this kid. One day I get a letter in the mail from that same brother I was just talking about. And I open it up and there was a Post-it note, which I kind of tossed aside. And there was an article from the New York Times. And it talked about this boy who was 15 years old and he lived in Harlem and he had memorized the entire subway system. So he could tell you how to get from any two streets, all 5 boroughs. Give him two streets and he would tell you exactly what subways to take to get from one to the other. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, neat story. And it talked about how he had autism. Now, at the time, this was 1999. Has anybody seen the movie Rain Man? Yeah, some people have seen that movie. So it was funny, just on a totally side note, I talk about this all the time, and I talk about the Rain Man as part of this presentation. And we're in Savannah last month, and Dylan mentioned to me that he has no idea what I'm talking about he'd never seen the movie. So I got to rent that movie with him one of these days. And so in my mind in 1999, when I thought of autism, I thought of the Rain Man. You know, someone who just kind of sits and rocks and doesn't say much and repeats the same thing over and over again. And that didn't fit Dylan's profile at all. So I wasn't thinking anything as I was reading this article. And then I got to the last paragraph. And the last paragraph said when this boy was little, he was obsessed with vacuum cleaners. And of course, a light went on. And I reached over and I grabbed the Post-it note that my brother had written, and he had one line on there. He said, "Could this be what Dylan has?" So I went to Amy and I said, check this out. What do you think of this? Could Dylan have autism? And, her reaction was the same. Autism. I mean, that doesn't seem like a logical diagnosis. But we thought, all right, let's check out this thing. It's called Asperger's, which was just an official diagnosis in 1994, is actually no longer a diagnosis. I don't know if you're aware of that. So Asperger's, as of the last DSM, became a non-diagnosis. So now it's just called high-functioning autism. And the reason for that, on another quick side note, is because of California. Because in the state of California, the law said that the schools did not have to help or provide any services for kids with Asperger's. The law said they had to provide services for kids with autism. And California, of course, is a huge state with millions and millions of people. So the DSM actually got rid of Asperger's to force all the California schools to help these kids, which is pretty interesting that one state can have that much influence, but a lot of people in California. And so we ended up going to McGeechee Hall, which is just off of Maine Medical Center. And what we wanted to find someone who didn't really do treatment. They just did diagnoses, because we'd had this experience and we were starting to become very cynical that if we just took him to another person, if we just took him to someone who specializes in Asperger's, they would just diagnose him with Asperger's, like the OCD lady and the Tourette's lady and the everything else lady. And so we wanted someone who had no vested interest in the diagnosis. And we did. And it took 6 months to get in, and then it took like a month he went in 2 or 3 times for different testing, and lo and behold, they came back and said that he had Asperger's. And so we're like, great, now we're going to get some help. So we go to the school and we said, look, our kid has autism. And we got the same reaction from the school as we kind of had. They thought autism is kids that don't talk, kids that's, just sit in a corner and rock and are in their own little world. And Dylan never, ever stops talking. So they were like, how could this kid possibly have autism? And I remember the teacher, who was a couple of years from when she should have retired, she literally went, and I thought, you do realize you're like 3 feet from me, right? I can hear you sighing. I mean, at least roll your head and turn your eye, roll your eyes. At least give me that courtesy instead of sighing and basically blowing us off completely. So we didn't get much help from the school, and that was a real struggle as we went and tried to figure out what we're going to do about this. So now we get to the first question that I had for the night for you guys. So now it's your turn. So the first question is, when do you think it's okay to tell a child that he or she has autism? Because Dylan was 8 years old. And the reason I put this question up is we get this question asked to us all the time, especially Dylan. When we're at conferences, people ask Dylan all the time, when were you told? Was it helpful? When would you tell a child? And so before I give you my opinion or Dylan's opinion, I'll let you discuss this amongst yourselves for a couple minutes, and then we'll get back to the presentation. All right, looks like you guys are having some good discussions, so that's good. I guess that was a good question. Does anybody have any thoughts that they want to share? I think if you push a button on that thing, you can activate the mic. If anybody has any thoughts on what your table talked about, anybody want to share?
Do you hold? Oh, you have to hold it down. Okay. So we kind of talked about how there really isn't a certain time or certain age. Just it should be as soon as it's a thing. Like let them know, because why hold that back from them when it's who they are? It's like waiting to tell your child like, hey, you're Caucasian. Like that's just who they are. Like why should you hold that back from them? And then also the longer you wait, it makes it more of a negative thing when it shouldn't be a negative thing, because it's something like, oh, I've been holding this back from you because I don't want you to know, and now I'm finally telling you. So that's what we talked about.
All right. Does anybody have anything? That's awesome, by the way.
Hello. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've never used one of these. It's kind of intimidating. We were kind of saying that the earlier you start associating it with either a positive thing or a neutral connotation, the better for the child. Because if you kind of withhold this information from them, they're going to assume that it's a negative thing and they're not going to understand. And as they get older in grade school, kids will start to notice things and they will start to wonder what's wrong with them. Whereas if they have a reason behind it for them to validate themselves, it might be better for their identity development.
Great. Anybody else?
So oftentimes there are certain situations where a child with Asperger's or autism will not be able to be diagnosed until their later years. So depending on the age of which they are diagnosed, may be the best point in their life. Like let's say they're diagnosed when they're 10, then it'd be appropriate to say maybe, okay, let's wait 2 years and then just wait for their 12 when they're actually experiencing a change, like they're experiencing a change in their body, they're experiencing a lot of emotional change, and having that explanation of your identity at that age where you're discovering yourself would be much more beneficial.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. That's terrific thoughts. I appreciate all of them. And so, like I said, the reason I put that up there is because we get asked that question a lot. And we were actually at one presentation where a woman told us that, hopefully she's not watching, most likely she's not, so her kid was 6 and she wanted to go to her school and tell all her she actually had a daughter with autism. She wanted to tell all her daughter's classmates that she had autism. So her classmates would know, but she did not want to tell her own kid. And Dylan almost had a heart attack. He was like, I don't remember what he said, but he was very polite, but he basically told her that was a horrible idea, because now all these kids are going to be looking at her like she's different, and she's going to have no idea why they're all treating her differently. And they would definitely treat her differently. We all know that. That's just the way kids are when they find out there's something different about somebody. And so Dylan and I both feel that, your answers were terrific. And, if the kid is 10 and they're not having any issues, then, maybe you could wait a couple of years. But basically, when you find out, you tell them, because they are probably noticing that they're different, and they probably are starting to, they're starting to, like Dylan. I mean, we had no idea. So Dylan was 9 when he was diagnosed. And so when Dylan was 7, 8, and he would see, the kids go by his house, by our house over and over again without stopping in to invite him, and he stopped getting invited to birthday parties. He had no idea why. And it didn't make any, so what do you think happens? He starts feeling like, that he has no worth because nobody's inviting him to things. And that was really hard. And it didn't get a whole lot easier with the diagnosis, but at least there was some kind of explanation to it. And I actually have an employee that works for me who was 40 years old before he was diagnosed, and was only diagnosed when his wife, who works at the school, had to fill out a questionnaire about a kid that they thought might have autism. And as she's filling it out, she's thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds just like my husband. And she brought it home and slid it across the table and said, why don't you fill this out? And it were like 25 questions on there, and he answered yes to like 22 out of 25 of them. And she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but you have autism. And it was such a relief for him. She was afraid that he was going to be upset, and it turned out it was a huge relief, because finally all those years made sense. All the times that he wasn't invited and couldn't fit in and didn't, couldn't be part of a group, couldn't figure out how to get, like Dylan, can't figure out how to get into a group. That awful experience of lunch in high school, which, Dylan and I spoke at a middle school one time, and somebody asked Dylan what he's been most afraid of in his life. And he said the middle school lunchroom, because you walk in and you literally have seconds to make a decision on where you're going to sit. And Dylan never fit in anywhere. Didn't even fit in with the unpopular kids. He fit in nowhere. And so he had this lunch table, lunch plate, and he's looking around in a room very similar to this, and he has no idea where to sit. And it was crippling. And so that's a really hard thing. That's why he loves working. He loves when he's working because, as he describes it, it's forced socialization. And so they have to be nice to you because they're working with you. You're set up to work at the same time, and they have to communicate. They have to talk to you. You don't have to decide where you're going to sit because everybody's taking lunch at the exact same time. And so, so I really appreciate those responses. Those were great. So as we move on to Dylan's story, we went through middle school. Middle school was not good at all. Middle school was pretty much a nightmare. He was basically kicked out of the public school in 6th grade. They changed his IEP without telling us, which is completely illegal. But we were so exhausted just trying to deal with Dylan. People would say, why didn't you sue him? We barely had the energy to get up in the morning and deal with the day. We also had 4 kids, and one of them was a newborn. And so we didn't have the energy to, file a suit. We just wanted to get Dylan taken care of. And actually, at one point, when they changed his IEP, and I went into the school and told them that what they were asking him to do was too difficult for him, the response from the principal was, well, he could do it if he wanted to. And I said, just because his disability isn't visible doesn't make it any less of a disability. If he were in a wheelchair, you wouldn't say, well, you could walk up the stairs if you wanted to. So anyway, as you read my book, you'll realize why we haven't been invited to speak at Scarborough. So you can read all about the middle school as Dylan would describe it. It's a very juicy story. So he ended up getting kicked out of middle school, went to Spurwink for a year, worked his way back to the middle school, which was a real challenge for him to get back into the middle school. And, he wanted some accommodations to be made, some relatively simple accommodations. One of them was he wanted to be like 30 seconds late for class. And they were like, no, you can't just be late for class. And, we're like, well, Dylan, why do you want to be late for class? And he said, because I don't want anybody seeing me going in and out of the special ed room. So when all the doors close, I'll come out of the special ed room and I'll go to my next class, or I'll wait at my locker, and when all the doors close, I'll go into the special ed room. But I don't want people seeing me going in and out of the special ed room because they're going to know that I'm different. And as I said at the very beginning, he's chasing the rabbit. And so he's desperately trying to appear normal. And they refuse to allow that accommodation, which is really a pretty simple accommodation, right? And then when he was transitioning back to the school from Spurwink, he was trying to get back into to go to the public school. They told him that he would go to school for a couple of classes, and then he would transfer to Spurwink for the rest of the day. And they were going to pick him up on a small bus. And he was like, no, there is no way I'm getting on a small bus right in front. If you've ever seen Scarborough Middle School, there's big giant windows and kids walking by. And he's like, there's no way with some cute 7th grade girl looking out the window that I'm getting on a small bus. That's not going to happen. And so he said, why don't you just pick me up like 100 feet down the road? And they said, no, Dylan, we can't pick you up off of school grounds. We have to pick you up, And so we went back and forth and back and forth. And luckily, at Scarborough Middle School, the special ed room is right next to the gym, which is right next to the teacher's parking lot. So we finally agreed with the school that he would go out the gym door and they would pick him up in the teacher's parking lot where nobody would see him getting on and off the small bus, which is, of course, as you know, a stigma that he just didn't want. He wanted to appear as normal as possible, which is good, right? I mean, you want kids to try to assimilate. And middle school is tough enough, right? So it made it even harder for Dylan. And as he got older, those struggles became more and more difficult, and fitting in became more and more of a challenge for him. And he was now bigger and stronger. And my wife is 5'2", not, very petite. And so now Dylan is bigger and stronger. So go to your room, that doesn't work. And, we had counselors that would say to us, just walk away. Well, if you're 5'2" and your son is 5'6" and a boy and much stronger and doesn't want you to walk away, guess what? You can't just walk away. And when he's kicking holes in walls and knocking things down, that's just totally impractical advice. So there would be days where I would be at work and I would get a phone call and all I would hear was screaming, just screaming on the other end from my wife and my son. And sometimes she would say, come home. And then he would grab the phone and hang it up, or all I would hear was screaming and then the phone would hang up. And luckily I work for myself, so I would just disappear. And nobody ever asked me what happened. They just knew that it was a Dylan issue. And it was a challenge. I mean, it was a real difficult time that we went through. And one of the challenges that we had was that we had different, what I call battle strategies in the book. And most of you are young. A lot of times I'm talking to parents, and a lot of parents come up to me after the presentation and they tell me that they have the same battle strategies as Amy and I had. And just briefly to explain it, and I know battle can sound like kind of a rough word when you're talking about your kid, but trust me, it's not a stretch. And so my battle strategy was of the military theory that you protect the unit, that under all circumstances, you're going to protect the unit. So, when you hear the story about the guy that falls on the grenade to protect his unit, that's the way I looked at it, except embarrassingly, and in full disclosure, I was not willing to fall on the grenade. I was willing to have Dylan fall on the grenade. I was willing to sacrifice Dylan to protect the family, okay, to protect my marriage, to protect my 3 girls. I was willing to sacrifice Dylan. My wife, on the other hand, had a very different battle strategy. Her battle strategy was more of the military theory that you leave no man behind. So this is Amy and Dylan in I think in 8th grade or maybe freshman year on a Disney cruise. And so her battle strategy was, if that ship is going down, she's going to hang on to that kid until it hits the bottom of the ocean. And if you think about it, those are almost diametrically opposed battle strategies. And so they caused some conflict between us, because a lot of times what would happen is I would come home from these, in the middle of this, and on a day like this where it's 55 degrees, I'd come home and I'd pull in the driveway and I would hear the screaming from the house before I'd even get into the house. And I would come in and I would do what men do. We try to control situations. That's what men do. And so I would try to control the situation. And somewhere in that process, I would cross a line. And I didn't know where that line was. And Amy didn't know where that line was. We didn't even know there was a line, but believe me, there was a line. And I always knew when I crossed it, because when I did, it went from me over here with Amy next to me and Dylan over there to me here, Dylan there, and Amy right in the middle, saying, you've gone far enough. And the mama bear clause would come out, and she would say, whether I did something physical or I said something verbal, I had gone too far for her to handle with her kid. And, understand, I have no ill will to her. She was, doing what moms do. And I was doing what dads do. I was trying to control the situation. But because we had different battle strategies, and because I pushed her too far in what she was comfortable with, I felt like she turned on me. And then I became resentful. I got mad at her. I'm like, why are you turning on me? I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to get this situation under control. And so I tell that story because as you go into your careers, whatever those may be, and you start dealing with parents, you are going to find men and women handling these situations very different. The divorce rate among people with children on the autism spectrum is just below death of a child. So you have death of a child, autism. It's extremely high because it's constant stress. Dylan lives in Orlando, Florida. He's 2,000 miles away, and it's still almost constant. We still worry about him every single day. And, Amy told me back a couple of months ago, she said, he's the first thing I think about every morning when I wake up. He's 25 years old. So it doesn't go away. And you will deal with parents that are either split or struggling, and help, if they can understand what their battle strategies are, it might be helpful for them. And so, we tried to figure out ways through it. We figured out ways that we could cope and help our marriage. We tried to laugh a lot, so we would basically stop watching all serious TV shows and we started watching just comedies, because at the end of the day, we just needed to laugh. We didn't want to watch Law and Order. We wanted to watch something funny, Cheers or Seinfeld or something, to laugh. And I remember there was a show called Parenthood. Has anybody ever heard of that show? Well, on that show, there was a kid that had Asperger's. And people used to say to me, oh, do you watch that show, Parenthood? There's a kid on there with Asperger's. And I'm like, dude, do you think at the end of the day, when I finally get my kids settled and I'm alone in a room with my wife, I'm going to turn on a show about a kid with autism? That is not going to happen. So we never saw that show. But the other thing that we did is we used to have, when we actually had a date night, we were lucky enough to find someone that was willing to watch 4 kids. We had a rule that there was no Dylan talk. So we would go out for dinner and a movie or whatever, and the rule was that we were not allowed to talk about Dylan, because we're on a date night. We're trying to live like a couple without a child with a disability and just be a couple. And if we started talking about Dylan, all the emotions that come along with Dylan would come right with it. And before we know it, we may as well just have brought Dylan on our date night. And that was not certainly what I had planned for date night. And so that was a rule that I think was really helpful for us, because it gave us some separation. It gave us some time to just, talk about the girls. And we also tried to find time where we could do things to separate Dylan from each other, from each of us. So I did a lot of coaching. I coached my daughters in softball a lot, and that gave me time one-on-one with the girls. And I would take Dylan, in exchange, I would take Dylan skiing, or I would take him to play golf, or like we'd have a guy's weekend. And it would just give Amy a chance to just spend time with the girls, getting pedicures and going to Disney movies and doing whatever it is that, they wanted to do. And that was also really important. So just think about those things when you're talking to parents, because it's overwhelming. It's really overwhelming dealing with this day in and day out. If you read my book, you'll read. It's exhausting, and you need those breaks. And so Dylan got to the point where, like I said, he was just really struggling. He was in high school. Academically, he was doing all right. Socially, he was not fitting in at all. He was just having a really hard time. And I remember I went in one night and said goodnight to him. He was a sophomore. It was October of his sophomore year. And I said, good night. And he said, good night. He said, don't be surprised to come in some morning and see me hanging from the ceiling fan. And I said, Dylan, why would you say something like that? And he said, because every day is worse than the day before. It never gets better. So what's the point? And it was really hard to watch and really hard to see a kid go through that. And Dylan started talking about suicide at 10, but now he was 16. And, we had, this is something we just couldn't take lightly. So if you read the book, you'll read what we did and kind of how we went about it. We knew we had to do something drastic, because we were really scared that he was going to actually follow through on some of those threats. So now I want to show you another video of Dylan, and this is Dylan talking about his high school years and kind of how he tried to figure out how to fit in. So, oh, and okay, so on the videos, he introduces himself as Dylon. So, and he actually recently legally changed his name to Dylon, but I'm making him change it back because it's a pain in the butt for flights and everything else. So, but anyway, he refers to himself as Dylon, and he prefers to be called Dylon. So if you ever meet him, call him Dylon. And here you go.
Hey, it's Dylon. Sorry I couldn't come out with y'all tonight. If you want to just envision me in the room for the next few moments, let's get into a little bit of my high school experience, okay? So I got to high school. I started realizing by this time that I was not fitting in socially, and this was not okay with me. My problem was I didn't fit in with any groups in high school, you know, even the uncool kids, you know, the not popular kids. They wouldn't hang out with me in their group of friends. And, you know, most people on the high school spectrum, if you will, fall somewhere in the middle. You know, you got the popular kids, the unpopular kids, and then most kids are somewhere in the middle. And I was just nowhere on that spectrum. So this was very frustrating for me, and I started observing the popular kids and what are they doing right, you know, that I'm not doing. What are these guys doing to go to all the cool parties and date all the hot girls? And I started observing everything they did. Now, to any person who's struggling to fit in socially, I recommend that you do this. Every word of advice I could get from neurotypical people, you know, I held on to that and I treated that like the word of the gospel, you know, and I just, you got to treat social skills like a game. So over time, you know, you get better at the sport. You don't always have to look for neurotypical people for advice on every little thing. And then once you get to that point, you'll start seeing sometimes they don't really know what they're talking about either. And if you don't believe me, you can watch any episode of Seinfeld, you know? These were four neurotypical people struggling to try to figure out what to do in all these different social situations. Like every episode, is it okay to be a regifter? Is it okay to do a cell phone walk and talk? Is it okay if your fiance dies from licking poisonous wedding invitations? You know, so it just is kind of refreshing once you get to that point to see that sometimes neurotypical people are not always God. And everybody struggles, you know. Some people are just a little bit better of actors than others.
So the next question I have for you guys to discuss amongst yourselves is, how can you in your job or everyday life help a child or young adult with autism learn to fit in? So why don't you take a couple of minutes and then we can talk about that. All right. Hate to break up the conversations because they do sound like you guys got a lot to say, but hopefully you can talk about it later or maybe some of your classes. But in the effort to keep moving things along, does anybody have any thoughts? Anything you want to share from the discussion or from Dylan's comments?
So we were just saying, to kind of go along with the question, is everybody else has to kind of create those opportunities and not expect for them to just happen naturally. So to help them, you can encourage them to insert themselves into situations, and then peers can kind of model that typical behavior, but they're not going to just automatically pick that up naturally and know to kind of insert themselves in certain situations. So by encouraging it and not necessarily forcing them, but being welcoming and inviting them over to sit with you at lunch, or encouraging them to go and talk to a certain group of people instead of just being a bystander and letting them try to navigate it all on their own.
That's really good. And they do have a really hard time. Dylan, if you watch, he did a great presentation from Savannah, Georgia. It's on our Facebook page and I did a live video of it about a month ago. And he talks about how, you know, he was there were these cliques at where he was working, and he couldn't figure out how they would all be like walking like 5 feet in front of him, like 3 or 4 people. And he couldn't figure out how to get into that group. He said, if I knew, I would have done it. He said, I just had no idea how to get into that group. Anybody else have any thoughts? The other thing that reminded me that's in my book that that when he went to one of the first boarding school that he got kicked out of, but the guy at the school said that when you enter a conversation, when most people enter a conversation, it's like entering a room, right? If you were to go join their conversation, it would be like you kind of open the door and you kind of just enter the room and hear what they're talking about and kind of join the conversation, right? He said Dylan enters a conversation by basically kicking the door in with a machine gun and going brrr, verbally, and that's how Dylan entered a conversation. And Dylan will tell you that today, that's how he entered a conversation. And his logic in his head, I don't think it's in any of the videos that I have today, but he said he was so obnoxious about it that it was almost easier for the people to tell him what he was doing wrong than it was to not, because it was almost more awkward to just not to say something than to ignore it. So does anybody else have any thoughts before we move on? All right, great. Well, so as we go on, Dylan gets through high school. We did get him through high school. He went to a couple of different boarding schools. First one, he didn't technically get kicked out of. We pulled him out of it just before he was going to get kicked out. He was going to get kicked out. And so we pulled him, sent him to another boarding school, and he made it through there. But then he wanted to graduate with his class, which he came back to Scarborough and did graduate with his class. But then they gave him a diploma and said, here you go, best of luck. And high school diploma does not really get you any skills to do anything, especially when you spent your whole time in special ed. And so we sent him to Florida. He went into a program called New Directions, which was supposed to help him get through college. But he didn't even make it through one semester at Palm Beach Community College because college was just not for him. It's just, this too much time management, there's too much multitasking of doing multiple things. You have to take classes that you're not interested in, which he can't process information that he's not very interested in. His brain just doesn't work that way. I always say if I ever won the Powerball, I would start a college and call it Aspie University. And just kids with Asperger's could come and they could study whatever the hell it is they're interested in. And they don't have to take art history, and they don't have to take math or science. They can just study dinosaurs or birds or whatever. And like Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book, they would leave with 10,000 hours, and they would probably be brilliant at whatever it is. But unfortunately, those colleges don't exist. They're starting to some colleges are starting to have programs for kids on the autism spectrum, but it's very slow coming. And so he couldn't get through college, and he has absolutely no ability to manage his time. In fact, you remember he said that he thinks about 100 profound thoughts a day. That's not a stretch. So last summer, he was supposed to get something done. I don't remember what it was. And he had all day to do it and didn't get it done. And so my wife texted him and said, did you do such and such? And he said, I didn't have time. And he literally had nothing to do the entire day. And so she said to me, I don't even know how to respond to that. And so she texted him back and she said, I have no comment. In other words, I'm not happy about that. And his response was, nobody has less time than the person with no ability to manage it. And if you think about that, and she's like, so she turns to me, she goes, damn it, I hate it when he comes up with something that's so logical that I can't respond to it. Nobody has less time than the person with no ability to manage it. And so, yeah, he had all day, but with no ability to manage his time, all day just, crept away, and all of a sudden, all day was gone. And so it's really hard. And this is the way Dylan sent it to us one time when he was living in Florida. He sent a text, and he said, this is my brain every morning when I wake up. And it was a picture of a mouse heading into a maze. So think about that for a second. I mean, think about waking up every morning And if you have one thing to do today or you have 4 things to do today, that's what your day looks like and feels like. It's a very frustrating way to go through life. In fact, we're working with him now where every morning we text him and we say, what is your one task for the day? One task. What is your one task for the day? So yesterday it was to find a gym. So, because he just moved to Orlando a couple of weeks ago. So his task yesterday was to find a gym that he was happy with. And he did it. He found a gym. And so, okay. So the goal is one of the things that we learned is we can't get him through that maze. There's nothing we can do in our lives every day, Amy and I, to get him through that maze. But we can help him around the corners. And if we help him around a corner every day, then, we're doing the best we can for him. But ultimately, we were, in Florida, speaking in Florida last year in the Lakeland area. And after we got done speaking, a woman raised her hand and she said, how did you get to the point where that's not what your day looks like? And Dylan looked at her and said, I never said I did. That's still what my day looks like. That's still what my brain feels like every morning when I wake up. It's a very frustrating way to go through life. And so Dylan went down to Florida, tried to kind of get, after he didn't get through the school, stayed down. He liked it in Florida, so he stayed down there for a while, tried to kind of figure out who he was. He was becoming an adult, tried to kind of figure out who he was, got really into the Black hip-hop culture, which, as you know, is not real big up here in Maine, where we're almost all white. So he got really into it. It was his special interest, and for a while. And so this is Dylan and me at a Chris Brown and T-Pain concert, where I was the oldest and whitest person in the building. But we had a good time. So Dylan, you see, he's got his do-rag, and you can't see it, but that's his black Jesus that he was wearing around his neck, and he's got his Coogee shirt that's way too big for him. And so that's the look that he was kind of living with. And so, one of the things that we've learned throughout Dylan's life is if we want to have a relationship with him, we need to go to wherever he is. And at the second conference that Dylan and I ever went to, this is at my 85th presentation. And so at the second one we ever went to, this dad raises his hand. It was in Cleveland, Ohio, and he says, my kid is really into animation, and I hate animation. He goes, how can I get him into something else? And, Dylan and I were in our second presentation. We're like, good luck with that. And so, I said, look, I don't know what to tell you, but I can tell you one thing. He ain't coming to you. So if you're into hunting or fishing or baseball, you can do whatever you want to do. He's not coming to you. So if you want to have a relationship with that kid, you better find something about animation that you like. And so, we did that with birds and cars and whatever it was that Dylan was interested in. I was actually going down to visit him for a few days, and I got off the plane in Miami with no intention to see Chris Brown and T-Pain and Bow Wow and Tyga, by the way. So that was the entire show. And so I get off the plane and I'm driving from Miami up to Deerfield Beach where he was living, and I see a billboard that says that Chris Brown and T-Pain are coming to the Amway Center on that Saturday, and I'm like, damn it. Because I knew I had to buy tickets. I couldn't let that not happen. And so I got on StubHub or whatever and got some tickets, and we had a great time. It was actually a really good show, I have to admit. Tyga I could live without, but the other ones were really good. And so let me show you, as Dylan learned to try to kind of figure out who he was, a lot of times people told him, just be yourself. Just be yourself. And so I'm going to play you a video of his thoughts on that expression.
Hey, it's Dialon here. So sorry I couldn't be with you guys tonight. If you can just imagine me there for the next few moments, I want to tell you a little bit about my experience growing up, trying to fit in socially. I always heard advice told to me that I should just be myself And I hear that all the time. I hear people say, just be yourself, just be yourself. As if that's all you have to do. You can just kick back, be yourself, and expect success. And I always felt like I had an issue with that as someone who doesn't have an ability to know, instinctively how to act socially. You can imagine how frustrating that comes from a neurotypical person, and then they're telling me just be yourself, and it's like easy for you to say, But is it really only people on the spectrum that can't, quote unquote, just be themselves? I feel like everybody changes the way they act to fit the circumstances that they're in. So I feel like the whole idea of being yourself, I don't know if it really even exists. I mean, if you had told me when I was 16 to just be myself, that would have been bad advice. I was 16, I worked at my first job at this pizza place, okay? This black guy came in, and he looks like Barack Obama. And so I yelled out to everyone, hey, we got Barack Obama in the house. Give that man a pizza, Hawaiian style. And that was me, being myself, but maybe not workplace appropriate. Even though it was 2007, so in my defense, that was a very topical joke at that time. Barack Obama was just coming up in the news. But anyway, I just had to learn, sometimes you can't just be unfiltered. And I just feel like, everybody does that to some extent. Some people are better actors than others. I, for one, had to work for this, swag I got. I wasn't born with this swag. I had to develop and work for this swag. And I just feel like if you know somebody on the spectrum, just please don't tell them this advice, because they might be really frustrated in doing what they think is being themselves, And if you are on the spectrum and you're not getting any friends, you're not getting any dates, you're not getting any jobs, and you hear somebody tell you to just be yourself, I would just tell you, don't listen to that, because you don't have to settle for that. You can be yourself, in my opinion, by staying true to your character and, your values. Be yourself like that. But as far as everything on the outside, I think it's okay to switch that up and play around, see what works. The way you dress, the way you talk, and the way you come at people. I think everyone does that. It's just, some people are a little better at it than others.
All right, so Dylan spent a couple years in Florida, and after he spent some time in Florida, decided he wanted to try to go to college again. So he came back to Maine and ended up enrolling. He had got into the New England School of Communication up at Husson in Bangor and deferred it. So he went back up there thinking that was going to work out. Unfortunately, again, college didn't work out. We brought him home, and again, this is all in the book, and it was a very stressful time. He came home. He had got in some legal trouble in Florida. Then he got in some legal trouble in Maine. Got in some legal trouble again. And so anyway, he got to a point where he was just a mess. You see the kid right there. He had put on a ton of weight. He was getting arrested. He was just a complete train wreck. And there wasn't much that we could do to seem to get him under control. And we didn't know where to go, and we didn't know what to do. And it got to the point where, so he went to the dentist with my wife, and she went into the dentist first to get a cleaning, and Dylan reached into her pocket and grabbed her phone, got on her Facebook page, and wrote, "Dylan killed himself today. We probably should have seen it coming. Your prayers are appreciated," and hit post. And for those of you who don't know, my wife is a state senator, so she has a gazillion Facebook friends. And so this thing went viral. Everybody in my office was crying. And I happened to be in Georgia at a box conference, which is as exciting as it sounds. And I had no cell signal, so I didn't even know what was going on. Amy was in the dentist chair, so she didn't know what was going on. And the governor had a press release ready to go. I mean, it looked real. And so all of a sudden I come up out of the Georgia Conference Center, up the escalator, and my phone starts lighting up like a Christmas tree. And I turn it on and I go, friggin' Dylan. Because I was pretty confident that my wife was not going to tell me that my son killed himself via Facebook. So I knew it was Dylan, and, he says that it was just trying to be provocative, but we took it as a desperate cry for help. And so we took a very drastic step, and we sat him down and we said, we found that Amy had found this program in Utah, and she said, so we sat down the next day and we said, when you get up tomorrow morning, you have two choices. We're going to drive you to the airport, you're going to go to this program in Utah, or we're going to drive you to the homeless shelter, and you're on your own, because we can't do this anymore. If you want to just throw your life away, then you can do that without us. You don't need our help to do that. But if you want help, we will do everything we can to help you. And, now he jokes about it because he says, what kind of ultimatum is that? Who's going to pick a homeless shelter? So, but we thought, we were worried. And on the way, before the discussion, I must have said to Amy 5 or 6 times, are you sure you're ready for this? Because, if he says homeless shelter, we got to do it. And she was like, nope, I'm ready. I know it's what we have to do. So he was in really bad shape, went to this program in Utah, and they saved his life. I will forever believe that they literally saved his life, that he was headed for jail or dead. And, they understood him. They were patient with him. They let him figure out who he was. They made us give him tough love. So we were not allowed to, send him money. We were not allowed to take him shopping if we went out to visit him. We were allowed to buy him toothpaste and, maybe get a haircut, and that was it. And if he got in trouble, that was his problem. When he got out there, he wasn't out there very long before he got arrested, and they were like, do not bail him out. And the bail was $10,000. So we were okay with that. But they're like, do not bail him out. And he was arrested over something that was completely because of his disability. It was a complete misunderstanding. And that was totally because of his disability. But he spent, 2 or 3 weeks in jail in Utah, and they ended up getting him out in the recognizance of this program, and and he ended up, it ended up being a misdemeanor, but which is good. But you're not in a good situation, by the way, when you call your kid in jail and he says, well, it's not as nice as the jails in Maine, but it's definitely nicer than the jails in Florida. So when you're comparing and contrasting jails, you're not in a very good place. And I remember one time when he was in jail and, was sitting in jail and in the court for his arraignment, and he comes out and he's wearing an orange jumpsuit and his hair's a mess and he's, 100 pounds overweight and he's just, looks awful. And I thought to myself, how did we get here? Like, how did this happen to us? How is that my kid? That I used to, take out for muffins in the morning and play with at the beach. It was overwhelming. And this is a scripture that Amy and I clung to a lot, that we always felt like there was a plan for Dylan. We didn't know what that plan was. We certainly didn't know how the heck we were going to get there, and we still don't. But when I sat there in that courtroom, I said, okay, God, he's all yours, because I don't know what to do with him. So you better figure this thing out. And we've done that many times. We just say, okay, he's all yours. And somehow it always ends up working out. And so Dylan and I wrote this book. We're traveling around. We've been all over the country now. This is us in Denver, actually, where I took him to a Rush concert to get back at him for the T-Pain and Chris Brown concert. And I thought we were even until he reminded me that he made me go to a Spice Girls concert once. So he still owes me a concert. And so, but he's still struggling. This is a blank screen. Here you go. This is his list of jobs, of some of his jobs. I think I'm missing some of them. And if you can see, without even seeing the details, you can get the point, right? He's 25 years old, and this is the jobs that he's had. He's been fired from just about every one of them. I think one of them he didn't get fired from. He either quit because he was about to get fired, and one of them was seasonal. So, but he does a terrific presentation about his jobs experience, which again is on our Facebook page if you're interested in watching it. And so I will show you now a little video about Dylan's jobs experience.
Hey, it's Dylon here, back at you. Let's get into my experience with jobs. Now, with jobs, I'm pretty good at getting the job. You know, nailing the interview, knowing exactly what they want to hear. I actually got so good at getting jobs, I ended up doing a workshop where I taught kids how to get jobs. But keeping the job was not part of my workshop. And I would not have been qualified for that because it's a totally different skill set. Keeping a job versus getting a job. Even if you disclose up front with the employer that you have a disability, you know, I'm going to need X, Y, Z from you, I usually tell them I need them to be very direct and give me very clear instructions. And you would think that that is like an employer's dream. You know, what employer doesn't want to just be very exact and direct? Of course I can do that. So they would always tell me, yeah, of course, that's no problem. They usually throw in that they know somebody who has Asperger's. I don't always buy that because it seems kind of like it's the cool thing to say. Not possibly that many people can know somebody with Asperger's, even if it's 1 in 50. But anyway, even if you tell them that you have a disability, people, the way it works is they go on how they feel in the moment. They don't go on what they know. And if somebody's looking at you and you don't look like you have a disability going on and they don't feel like there's anything wrong with you, they're just going to judge you as, you know, being difficult. He's just being difficult, or he just isn't cutting it here. And people go on face value. Now, let me get into an example about what I mean, because I know I'm going real abstract here, okay? So this is an example of a real kind of miscommunication that can happen. I was working at a pizza place about a couple years ago. I was a delivery driver, and the drivers stay after and help the manager clean up, right, before we go home for the night. So I am in there, I'm mopping up the kitchen, and I spill mop water all over the floor. And it's a little kitchen, lot of mop water, right? Like I was walking like this in there, you know, not a single thing of water. You would have hydroplaned in there. And so I don't know what to do about this mess. And the assistant manager, this dude is like 19, okay? He doesn't know what to do either. And he's just having me try to get it up with a dry mop. And I do that for like 15 minutes, and then, you know, I don't know how this floor is going to look tomorrow, you know, how it's going to dry. I'm not an expert at moisture and evaporation, you know, so I ask him, you know, do you think it's good enough? Can we go, or should I keep going? Just hoping for a direct, you know, yes or no from my boss. And this guy won't give me a straight answer. He says, if you think that's good enough, man, I guess we can take off. And so I keep going for another 15 minutes. And again, you know, I'm not an expert at moisture and how this floor is going to look when it evaporates, you know. And I asked this guy again, okay, do you think it looks good enough? Like, can we go home yet, or should I keep going, you know? Just wanting a yay or nay, you know. If it's not good enough, I'll keep going. If it is, cool. And he won't give me a straight answer. He goes, if you think that's good enough, man, I guess we can take off. And so, long story short, I ended up getting fired over this incident. And of course, I found out that it wasn't the first incident that had happened, but I hadn't really been told about the other ones. You know, I wasn't learning the menu fast enough. I was asking questions when I shouldn't be asking questions anymore. And this is just an example of how complex, miscommunications can happen, because this guy, in his mind, he did tell me that I should keep mopping, but he didn't literally say those words. And how do people with Asperger's take things? Literally. And so I hope you understand a little bit of insight into my work experience.
So I'm going to skip the last question because I know we're getting tight for time, and I want to make sure we have time for Q&A and Dylan's last video. So what's Dylan up to now? So Dylan is, like I said, he's living in Florida. He's doing some social skills coaching. So he's been doing some of that via Skype and FaceTime and in person when they're in the area. And he's learned a lot over the years. He's certainly not an expert, but as he puts it, he said, I can help somebody more than anybody with some degree on their wall because I've lived it and I know what it's like. And so he's been doing that, and he actually really enjoys that. He has his Dylon persona going. So first of all, you can see you got Dylon comedy. So if you go on YouTube, if you go anywhere, he's Dylon all over. It's real Dylon is actually what it is. So if you look up real Dylon, you'll find him in Google, in everything. So, but if you go to Dylon comedy and click the subscribe button, because YouTube's number one thing is subscribers, not likes, believe it or not. And so the more subscribers you have, you won't get any emails or anything, but the more subscribers he gets, the higher he ranks in YouTube. And so he's got some really funny parody videos. So the top one there is called I'm Not Gay. And it's got, on that picture, it's got 22,000 views, but it's actually up to like 35,000 now. And it's really funny. It's set to Lady Gaga's Poker Face. And it's all about how much he likes gay guys, but he's not gay. But he wants to be friends with gay guys. And because he likes all the kind of stereotypical gay things that they like. And so it's a really funny video. And then the one on the bottom is called Gummed Out, and that's about how much he loves gum. But it's set to a rap song, so he's like a drug dealer, but he's dealing gum. And so it's very fun. They're both very funny videos. And then he's got his radio show, which is called Riding with Dylon, and you just go to ridingwithdylon.com. And he calls it the only talk show not hosted by a 55-year-old white guy. And so he talks about all kinds of things, politics and dating. He's got a whole segment called Dating with Dylon, which is interesting. And I'll leave it at that. And so he's doing a great job with that and having a lot of fun with it. And what he's doing in Orlando, he's in a program called Recording Connections, where he's actually an apprentice and he's learning soundboards. So he does classwork, but he does it on his own time, and it's online. And then he goes into the studio and he learns how to do mixing. And so that's what he moved to Orlando for. And he's only been down there a couple of weeks, but he's actually at the studio right now. And he loves music. Music is absolutely, throughout all the years with all the special interests that have come and gone, music has always been at the top of him. And he talks about that on one of his videos you can see on our YouTube channel. He talks about the struggles of being called high functioning and having a special interest. And he talks about the special interests of music and how lonely that can be, because he wants to talk about music way more than anybody else does. But these people hopefully do too. So with that, I want to get to the last video of Dylan, and then we can do some Q&A.
All right, let's get into my experience with dating and girls. Now, my experience with girls is weirdly super similar to my job experience, and that is that I am really good at getting girls. Was I always good at this? No, and I wasn't always good at getting jobs either, but over time, I got pretty good at it, and I like to think I am pretty good at it. But keeping girls, that I am not so good at. I couldn't do a workshop on that either. It's the same thing as a job situation, except of course it's going to be a little bit worse because a girl hasn't put you through HR training and orientation. You know, she hasn't done all the paperwork to get you started as a member of the team. No, a girl is going to move right on to the next 5 guys that are messaging her, and no hesitation. And over time, I kind of thought about this, and I have a good perspective on it, and that is that girls kind of treat me like I'm a boy band. Now, stay with me. I'm going to explain this. They treat me like I'm the Jonas Brothers. That means that they like me a lot for a little while, and as soon as One Direction comes to town, they tear all the posters off their walls, and they move on to the next big thing. And I am never the Nick Jonas or the Justin Timberlake of that boy band. No. I am always ended up the Chris Kirkpatrick or the Kevin Richardson of that boy band. Who the hell are those guys? Exactly. But, you know, it could be a lot worse than girls treating me like I'm a boy band. That's how I look at it. Hey, I got my poster up on that bedroom wall. I had my 15 minutes of fame, you know, my moment in the sun.
So that's the story of us. And again, I thank you all for coming out tonight. And like I said, I'll have books back there if anybody wants to buy a book. They're normally $20, but if you're a student, they'll be $10 tonight. And I have audiobooks as well that are just on a thumb drive. And does anybody have any questions before we wrap up?
I know that some parents of children with autism believe that vaccinations have led to their child getting autism. I was just wondering what your view on that subject is.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. And we've read some of those books about the vaccinations, and I don't really have an opinion on it. I think that thimerosal that was extremely high, and at the same time that was happening, there was this extremely high rate of autism. I'm not sure that could be completely coincidence. Dylan falls in that range. There was like a 5-year period, and Dylan happens to he got his MMR during that same time frame, and he seemed perfectly fine until he was about 2, with exception of the car thing. And that's one of the things that people that have that theory say is, well, my kid seemed perfectly fine, and then he got this shot, and all of a sudden he stopped speaking. But Dylan, one of the things that kind of contradicts that is, so Dylan was 13, 14 months, and he started talking. He said, mama, dada, doggy, all your typical baby words. And then he stopped. And so he went like months without adding any more words. And we just thought, well, he'll add them when he adds them. And, we didn't really worry a whole lot about it. And then one day I was putting him to bed, and he reaches up onto the bookshelf and he pulls a book down and he says, how about this book? And I was like, what? And he says, how about we read this book? And I go, you talk? And he went from mama dada doggy to complete, full, grammatically correct sentences overnight, about the same time that he got that shot. So, how did that happen? So, and it was weird because he talked like a 13-year-old, from one day to the next, and never even said a double negative or said, if I come home and say, how was your day? He never said, me and mommy went to the beach. He'd always say, mommy and I went to the beach. And so it was really odd. But, so we don't put my theory on Dylan, which you can read in the book, is the way he was born. He ended up having Amy had back labor. He came out, his head was extremely disformed, and I feel like his frontal lobe was damaged at birth. I'll never be able to prove that. It doesn't really matter now anyway, but I'll die thinking that something happened in his birth that screwed up his frontal lobe, which is where autism is mostly affected. So I know there's some people that, and I don't even really touch on it in the book because I don't, there's enough books about that. But I don't buy this whole thing with like Jenny McCarthy that say that, she cured her kid of autism. I think that's a whole bunch of hooey. My guess is her kid never had autism to begin with. He was just slow to develop. So if I could cure, and one of the things that we used to go to these autism support groups, and we would go, and we stopped going. Part of the reason we stopped going is because people would, we'd hear these people and they'd be like, oh, our house is in crisis and our kid is, causing all these problems, and we're, my husband's sleeping on the couch and we're about to get divorced. But I wouldn't change Timmy for anything. And I'd be like, really? Is that really how you feel? And I would get in the car and I would say to my wife, I must be the crappiest dad ever. I don't think I use the word crappy. And I said, because if I had a magic wand and I could wave it and get rid of his autism, I would do it in about 1 second. And frankly, and I say this in front of Dylan, he'd be pretty pissed if I had that wand sticking in my back pocket and I didn't pull it out. Because who wants to go through life with that maze in their head every day? So, I don't buy this, I fix my kid of autism stuff. I think it sells a lot of books, but I don't buy it.
You push it? Okay. I want to thank you for coming this evening. I was curious to hear about what Dylan's relationships are like with his sisters.
It's good now. It had its tough times, especially with Mariah, who's 2.5 years younger, 2 years and 9 months younger. There were some challenging times when middle school, and she was always kind of like the older sister. Like the teachers would tell us that she would look out in the hall if she heard noises. She would, she'd go peek in the hall to see if it was Dylan. There's some really, in the video that the two of them do, there's some really touching stories about, her experiences growing up with Dylan, that when she was little, she just thought he was just her quirky brother, and that was just the way it was. And then when she got a little older and started going to friends' houses, and she'd say, my brother doesn't act like that, and this isn't the way it works at my house. And when Mariah was like 8, she looked up at Amy one day and said, so someday I'm going to have to take care of Dylan, right? And that's a pretty heavy thing for an 8 or 9-year-old to say. And Amy said, well, hopefully we can figure out a way so that Dylan can take care of himself, but you're always going to have to look out for him. And she's actually visiting him right now as we speak. But there were some tough times. Right before Dylan went to Utah, he pepper sprayed Lily in the face because of this. They were fighting over the volume of the TV, and he pulled out some pepper spray and sprayed her in the face and burned her eyes pretty bad. I don't know if you've ever had pepper spray. If you've even smelled pepper spray, much less get it sprayed in your face, it's extremely painful. And somehow, some way, my daughters hold no grudges to Dylan, which is pretty amazing. And they're all, like I said, there's a chapter in the book about it, but Dylan made us all much better people. And he made our daughters, especially Mariah and Lily. Serena is 13, so he moved out of our house when she was like 6, when he moved to Florida. So she's got a little different relationship with Dylan. But she thinks he's just awesome because they like the same kind of music, and she's like 13 going on 18, and he's 25 going on 18. So they basically like the same age. So.
So I was just reading like the back of the business cards that you put on the table. And do you feel like society kind of alienates people with autism in like such a negative way? And like how could we change the view to make people with autism a little more accepted? Because just reading it on the back, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit that you have to apologize and people look at parents like it's your fault that your child is acting that way. So it's just like, how can we begin, I guess, to change that stigma that goes along with autism?
I think it starts one person at a time. It's not going to happen overnight. The problem is that it's in a lot of cases, it's an invisible disability. And, Amy and I used to joke about having a card like this. And then actually right about the same time that I published the book, I was at the gym and I was, farting around on Facebook, and a friend of mine on Facebook who has no kids, put up a post that said, I'm at a restaurant and this kid is acting up and the parents aren't doing anything. There's no discipline anymore. And I read the feeds below, all the comments, and everybody was like, yeah, parents don't discipline their kids anymore, blah, blah, blah. They shouldn't be in that restaurant. They should take that kid, da, 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 da. And I had to step in. I just couldn't keep myself from saying something. And so I made a comment and I said, has it occurred to any of you that child has a neurological disability that you can't see? And those parents thought, hey, let's go out for a night as a family. And it backfired on them. And now all they want to do is get the check, go home, get their kid to bed, crawl under the covers, and wish they just stayed home. And that pretty much ended the comments. I went home and I told Amy, I'm making those cards up because we've been in too many restaurants and too many supermarkets where, especially when Dylan was little, where he was having a meltdown and people look at Dylan and like he said, they go on face value and they think he's just being a difficult kid or he's just a jerk or we're just terrible parents. So I hand those cards out as much as I can to parents and say, use them as many as you want. I sell them on my website, but when I'm at conferences, I hand out hundreds of them. Just take them. I don't sell them. And I just want people to be able to, if you're in a supermarket or you're in a restaurant and your kid had a tough time at that restaurant, you don't want to embarrass the kid by saying in front of the waitress, look, my kid has autism. I'm doing the best I can here. But at the end of the meal, if you just slip this in the check, maybe the next kid that's acting up, she won't be so quick to think that they're just being terrible parents. But it's hard because it's an invisible disability. And when Dylan in his jobs presentation talks about how he got fired from this camp, he got fired at a camp for disabilities because of his disability. You can't make that up. And so, before he got fired, he actually went to them and begged them to tell everybody at the camp, all the other counselors, about his disability. And they said, well, we don't want people to be looking at you differently. And he's like, no, I'm telling you, please tell everybody. Tell them about my disability. And they said, well, we don't like to share that information. He said, but most of the people that come here have a visible disability. So you don't have to tell everybody that they can't walk or that they, whatever. Mine you can't tell. So people just think I'm, antisocial or they just think I'm obnoxious or whatever. So they did. And it was a miracle. He's like, I couldn't believe it. Like overnight, everybody started being nicer to me. Unfortunately, he got fired the next day. So he only got to experience that for one day before he got fired. So that was unfortunate.
So UNE this summer is partnering with the city of Biddeford to run a summer camp for 2 weeks. Thank you. And the summer camp is going to be working with children with autism. And I was just wondering if you had one piece of advice to give us, because there are a few of us in the room.
Wow, that's great. I didn't know that. That's awesome. If I had one piece of advice, put me on the spot. I would say that just remember, Dylan and I have been to a bunch of conferences, these autism conferences, and they sell these T-shirts that say, if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. So just remember that they're not all the same. They all look at each kid as an individual. That, one kid with autism may have one needs, another kid, that's why they call it a spectrum, because it goes everything from the kid sitting in the corner rocking who can't even speak and is 22 years old and is still having to wear diapers, to Dylan, to Bill Gates and Dan Aykroyd, and possibly Steven Spielberg and, these wildly successful people. Mark Zuckerberg is, if you've seen the movie about how Facebook was started, it takes about 3 minutes into the movie before you realize he has Asperger's. And so he's doing all right for himself, right? But it's a huge spectrum. So if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. Great. Well, if anybody thinks of anything later, I'm on Facebook. You can email me. Thank you all for whatever it is that you're doing in your studies. Whatever you're doing, just know that you could have a huge impact on a family, like more than you're ever going to even probably realize. A caring, understanding, whatever it is that you do, can make a huge difference. The few that we've found, and if you read my book, anybody that I speak negatively about, that's not their real name. So I changed all the names. But the people that I speak positively about are their real names. But I asked everybody permission. But the ones that I speak positively about, especially like his ed tech in middle school and the people in Utah, they are life changers, and you can be a life changer for some family. You may not change all the families, you may not save all the marriages, but you can change a life by doing whatever it is that you're studying to do and impacting these families. So on behalf of someone who went through a lot of really, really crappy counselors and really horrible advice, as you'll read if you read my book, thank you for coming tonight and trying to learn something more about it. I really appreciate it. And I can tell you that Dylan would too. So thank you.